Hey guys, this is Gary. One of the most iconic cars to come out from Japan started out as a prince, and instead of becoming a king, it became known as Godzilla. The Nissan GTR's racing heritage and dominance, as well as street cred, is legendary. This video will be on the history of the Nissan GTR. The Prince Motor Company was a Japanese automotive manufacturer named to honor Prince Akihito. Prince introduced the first generation Skyline in 1957 as a luxury sedan, which was also offered in a sporty coupe and convertible body style. Its styling was influenced by American cars, but it was never sold in this country. The second generation Skyline was introduced in 1963. This is the first time we see the iconic round taillights appear. Prince also started their racing venture with this generation by increasing the wheelbase by 8 inches in the front. This allowed an inline-6 from the higher model S40 Gloria to fit. There were two versions, a GTA with a single carburetor and a GTB with a triple carburetor, and more race-oriented parts, which they also used for their racing program. The acronym GTB stood for Gran Turismo Berlinetta, which means Grand Tourer Sport in English. Prince used the Skyline to race in the second Japan Grand Prix in 1964 and took second to sixth place, with first place going to the more race-oriented Porsche 904 GTS. It wasn't all glamour and glory for Prince because the Japan Ministry of International Trade soon merged Prince with the larger company Nissan in 1966. The third generation Nissan Skyline appeared in July of 1968 with a trim similar to the previous GTA called the 2000 GTX. But there was no mention of a GTB replacement. The Prince name was dropped this year, making the Skyline Nissan specific. Nissan's acquirement of Prince gained engineers, racing experience, and plans for a successor to the GTB. Nissan assigned former Prince engineer Shinichiro Sakurai to head the successor project, and he would soon later be known as the father of the GTR. During the 1968 Tokyo Auto Show, a new Skyline trim appeared, the GTR. It was released in February of 1969 and was named the Skyline 2000 GTR. 2000 referred to the 2-liter displacement, and GTR stood for Gran Turismo Racer. The first Skyline GTR was nicknamed Hakosuka, which meant box and skyline, and were characteristic of its style and included weight reduction. Then a coupe arrived in 1971. The GTR was powered by the dual overhead cam inline-6 S20 engine in a rear-wheel drive layout. The engine is similar to the one used in Prince's R380 race car called the GR8, which won the third Grand Prix of Japan in 1966. The GTR was very popular on the Japanese race circuit with a total of 50 consecutive victories for its short production time frame. The fourth generation Nissan Skyline was introduced in 1972 with a GTR trim. It was only offered in a coupe body style and received the same 2-liter inline-6, making 160 horsepower and rear-wheel drive with disc brakes. It also became heavier though. Only 197 units were produced and sold in Japan due to stricter emissions regulations and the worldwide oil crisis. The fourth generation GTR was probably the only GTR that was not used in any major racing. It would take 16 years until we see another GTR. In the meantime, Nissan continued to manufacture the fifth generation Skyline. The GTR replacement was named the 2000 GT EX and used a turbocharged inline-6 L20 ET. The sixth generation Skyline introduced the R chassis code that we currently know today. A GTR was not offered, but an RSX Turbo was eventually created as the top model with the FJ20 ET engine. The 7th generation Skyline also saw no GTR trim, but did have a top-of-the-line GTSR powered by a 210 horsepower RB20 DET. Nissan struggled during this time in Group A racing with the Skyline GTSR, but they had a trick up their sleeve, as that would eventually come to an end in 1990. The 8th generation Nissan Skyline, introduced in 1989, also brought with it the return of the GTR. Even with the introduction of the R32 GTR, the USA still did not receive a single Skyline model. The inline-6 engine was used reminiscent of past GTRs, but now called the RB26 DETT, which was a 2.6-liter twin-turbo engine with 280 horsepower. It was no longer rear-wheel drive and used an all-wheel drive system called Atezza ETS, which operated much like a rear-wheel drive car until it sensed traction loss. Then torque would transfer from the rear tires to the front tires and achieve superior traction. It also used a method of four-wheel steering called super hiatus. There would be many GTR special trims offered to meet race spec rules and entice public interest, such as the Skyline GTR Nismo, Alltech, GTR N1, V-Spec, and V-Spec 2. The Nissan Skyline GTR won the Japanese JTCC Group A Series Championship 4 years in a row. In premier export markets such as Australia, the GTR went on to win the Australian Touring Car Championship in 1991 and 1992, beating out the previously untouchable Ford Sierra Cosworth, until regulations were imposed so that GTRs could not qualify to enter the event anymore because of its dominance. An Australian magazine named Wheels would then give the GTR the infamous nickname Godzilla. The 9th generation Nissan Skyline followed in 1995. It also offered a GTR trim and continued not being offered in the USA. The R33 Skyline GTR gained refinements and addressed issues from the previous generation R32, but became heavier, larger, and not as nimble, where it found itself pretty much overshadowed by the previous generation's racing success. Starting with this generation, there was also an optional advanced Atezza ETS Pro system with active LSD at the rear that distributed torque from side to side and independently controlled the ABS. Other GTR trims would also be offered for this generation, such as the V-Spec, Alltech 40th Anniversary, Nismo 400R, GTR N1, and GTR LM. Fun fact, there was an Alltech tuned Stagia 260 RS released with full GTR drivetrain, body kit, and wheels with GTR electronics. In a sense, it was the wagon version of the GTR. As far as racing goes, this generation GTR only participated in the JGTC GT500, which it dominated until it was defeated by the McLaren F1 GTR in its final year. The 10th generation Nissan Skyline was introduced in 1999, and with it, another GTR. It became smaller like the R32 with an improved chassis and more advanced technology due to feedback from the R33. It would still not be available for the US market. The RB26 DETT received an aesthetically appealing red valve cover compared to the black from previous generations. There would also be many GTR trims such as the V-Spec, V-Spec 2, N1, M-Spec, NER, and the Nismo Z-Tune. It wasn't all positive for this generation Skyline GTR during its introduction in 1999, as Nissan also found itself with a financial debt of $20 billion and near bankruptcy. French company Renault would eventually purchase 37% of Nissan in March of 1999, forming the Renault-Nissan Alliance. Chief Operating Officer Carlos Ghosn created the Nissan Revival Plan in 2000 and went into Nissan to clean house. The Nissan Revival Plan financial goals were reached before the end of March 2002, eliminating Nissan's debt. Prior to stabilization, discussions of a new Skyline appeared. The Skyline model now received the V chassis code and would be based on a front midship platform. It would use the new VQ family of V6 engines also. We know it here in the US as the G35, G37, Q50, and Q60. The 6th generation Nissan GTR was next on the list to make a return as Nissan's iconic supercar. The GTR program was headed by Chief Engineer Kazutoshi Mizuno. The GTR would also now be available to the global market, especially in the USA, where it was never introduced in the past. The first appearance was in concept form at the 2001 Tokyo Motor Show. The second appearance was the GTR prototype at the 2005 Tokyo Motor Show until its introduction in 2008. Nissan made the GTR into its own model, which carried the R chassis code and separated itself from the Skyline model. The GTR uses Nissan's premium midship platform with a 3.8-liter twin-turbo V6 with Ateza ETS all-wheel drive. The GTR would also be designed to be a practical 2+2 everyday supercar for all weather conditions. Its target though was to beat the Porsche 911 Turbo at the Nürburgring, in which it did, causing Porsche to go back and revise it. Several editions were also offered, such as Egoist, Gentleman, Track, Black, Spec V, 45th Anniversary, and Nismo. The R35 GTR has been very popular in drag racing, half-mile racing, street races, road racing, and JGTC. The R35 GTR is showing its age though. It's been almost a decade now, and there has not been any significant improvements. There have been rumors of a future 7th generation Nissan GTR which could arrive in 2020. It would be hybrid powered and in a 2-seater form based on the Gran Turismo 2020 concept. Will Nissan be able to meet the high expectations set by previous generation GTRs? I hope you enjoyed the history of the Nissan GTR. It's had a sporadic adventure, but proved itself to be legendary. Like this video if you enjoyed it and subscribe for future content. I'll see you in the next one.